All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number, 209 today. Wow. It's getting up there. We are going to be discussing Megalith Hunter and Malta with our new buddy, or our new friend, Laura Tabone. She runs the Megalith Hunter channel, which you can go check out. I have the link down below the video. She also has a really cool Instagram page where she's posting all sorts of pictures from around Malta and everything. So go check that out as well. I have the link down below to that also. And before we get started here, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/mindescapepodcast. For just $2 a month, you'll get exclusive guest episodes and segments. There's a ton of stuff up there. If you listen to our show and you're looking for more content, just go check it out. It's just $2 a month. So and one more time, indrasweb.org is live. This is the social media platform we created to connect open minds. If you want to discuss ancient civilizations or ancient sites or metaphysics, philosophy, whatever you want to discuss, it's the perfect place to do it. So head on over there and set up a profile. We are still working on getting it in the App Store. And without further ado, welcome on the show, Laura.
Hi, guys. It's nice to finally do this. I know we've been talking about it for a while.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. So you run, I think I've been following you actually since you started posting pictures and doing everything from the beginning. You do have do little stuff on Facebook as well. So if you're on Facebook, check her out on there. But yeah, you just started posting pictures. I saw, Instagram and everything. And now you have a channel on YouTube where you're posting videos and kind of going through a little bit of, the temples and a lot of the sites and some of the mysteries surrounding Malta. So what got you into all of this?
Well, I've been interested in ancient history. Well, all periods of history, but ancient history especially since probably the 90s. I started reading a lot of books. I've read obviously all of Graham Hancock's books. And I've always been drawn to the Neolithic period because it's such a mystery. And last year, we were staycationing the whole year in Malta. We couldn't really go anywhere, so we just kept going to Gozo. And I had already been to all the sites since I've been living here around 8-9 years. And I thought there's nothing really left to see. And then I started downloading documents which talk about excavations that have happened in the past, or references to scattered megaliths that haven't been excavated and they're not 100% sure if they did belong to temples or menhirs. And I realized that there are so many monuments that are off the beaten track. So I started going around and trying to find them. And it's very difficult because most of these old documents obviously don't have GPS. And they'll name a field or a road that doesn't exist anymore, or where the name has changed. So it's actually really difficult. So I like hiking. So I turned my hiking into megalith hunting. And that's where I got the name from. And then as I went around and found more and more sites off the beaten track, as well as some where they may or may not be megalithic, or they could be natural, I started recording my hikes on Instagram, and then reading more and more documents and more books on Maltese prehistory. And that's how this whole project developed. And now it's something that I want to do outside of Malta as well, but it's just a bit tricky to travel at the moment. Sure. So I'm still staycationing. But when I can, I obviously have read a lot about the megaliths of different countries. And I'm trying to feature more and more of those analyses on my channel. So, but from an Instagram perspective at the moment, going around taking photographs, that's just Malta and Gozo.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you were going to spread out past Malta, but you made a good point. It's hard to get around. Just one thing, actually, your lapel thing's banging against, and it's kind of clicking pretty loud on the your mic on your. I don't know if there's something we can fix. I was just making you aware of it.
Yeah, I think. Right. I think it's just moving the tassels on my dress.
Okay.
Very excited.
I mean, if you want, you maybe unplug it if you turn the volume down. We could try that. I don't know if that'll work.
Let me see if I can just turn the volume. I can't find the jazzy thing that. There. 1 second. Okay, and maybe if I just talk less with my hands, it will help.
I was gonna say too, if you want to try, you could unplug the mic and just talk through the computer. If maybe we turn the audio that's coming through down.
But the headphones are connected to the mic, so.
Okay, gotcha.
Can't, because we need the headphones.
Right.
Sounds better.
Yeah. So in terms of Malta and everything like that, there's a lot of like weird mysteries that some people perpetuate. I think some of the mysteries even further than what they actually are. That's not to say there's not actual real mysteries. There's like cart ruts. There's weird skeletons and skulls and people disappearing in the hypogeum and all sorts of weird, weird things that have happened. But you and I kind of put together a little bit of a slideshow, so I'm going to pull that up here and we can start going through that. Before we do that, I was going to pull up a quick map of Malta just so people can see, the basic island, and you have the main part of Malta, and then you also have Gozo. It looks like there's a little island in between. Is it like really dry there? Is it kind of like similar to like Sicily in a way?
Yeah, it's very dry.
Okay.
It's very, very hot at the moment.
Like what kind of temperatures are we talking here? Like
we're having a heat wave, so it's been over 40 this week, degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's very, very hot.
Warm, let's just say that.
Yeah. So you obviously live there, which is kind of cool. You get to explore a lot of these sites that most people have to travel to. But let's get into it here. This is just a quick dating timetable, so you can see like the Neolithic period that goes from 5000 to 4100 BC. And you've got some of the earliest dated sites. I think it's like Gahar Dalam. Is that how you pronounce it?
Dalam, yeah.
Okay. Again, I'm going to butcher some of these words. Like you mentioned,
no, it's all right.
The language is very difficult. You got gray scorba and then red scorba, and then you get down to the temple period, which I think we're going to be talking about some of those sites. And you got Zabush. Zabush. All right. All right.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen.
And then Imgar.
Yeah.
Imgar. Okay. And then Gigantia.
Gigantia. Yeah.
Okay.
Snaflieni, Toshin. I mean, I have a comment to make on this. So, I was reading this this monograph by the Fraxis Project. So that's a group that did excavations between 2013 and 2018, and they got new dating evidence for the Temple period and the early Neolithic. And one of the interesting things that they found is that there's a gap between the early Neolithic and the Temple period of roughly 800 years.
Wow.
Where there is some scanty dating evidence, but not very much. So either the islands emptied out completely during that period and then were resettled, and not necessarily by that previous early Neolithic farming culture, or the population decreased for some reason to barely detectable levels, and then increased again around the Temple period, which is when to begin with they started building rock-cut lobed tombs and then developed into the megalithic architecture that we can still see today. So I think that's really interesting. It's called the fifth millennium hiatus, and no one kind of knows why they left and if it was the same people or same culture that came back 800 years later.
Well, and I think that even though this is probably one of the earliest European sites, there are a lot of similarities I found from the figurines to some of the architecture and megaliths to like the Sardinian sites of, the Nuragi people. There's some similarities I found there. If you look at even the figurines, similar to a lot of the Cyclitic cultures in Greece, and even some similarities to like going all the way back to Göbekli Tepe. Not like a ton, but just like you could see kind of almost like a progression or some sort of crossover.
Yeah, for sure. There seems to be a lot of similarities, even though I mean, there's no proof of any connection between these cultures, and they are timed quite a few thousand years apart.
Right.
Sardinia has a pre-Neuralgic culture, but the Neuralgic culture came quite a bit later than Malta. But still, it's just interesting because we like to think that they started off farming and then they became, the Neolithic people became more settled. They had more time for, let's say, craft specializations, and then had enough time, apparently, to invest in building all these megaliths. But it doesn't seem that gradual, because if there's a gap between the farming communities and then the megalith builders, it does seem rather sudden that they were able to accomplish that. And the monuments here are on a par with, age-wise, with some in Scotland and in Western Europe, like in Portugal and Spain.
Right.
So, but Sicily doesn't really have any megaliths, like a few dolmens, that's it. And dolmens are normally attributed to the Bronze Age later anyway. But yeah, so it's so strange because they say the early Neolithic farmers came from southeast Sicily to Malta and started their agriculture here. They realized that the archaeologists, because of the similarities between the pottery styles. But the megalith builders that then started, putting together these temples 800 years later, no one's really sure where they came from. And strangely enough, the megalith kind of trend wasn't happening in Sicily, which is the nearest neighbor.
Yeah, and do you think it could have been like maybe just the soil's better on Malta or something kind of like that? Or do you think it's just a better general location to do that kind of stuff?
I mean, I don't know why the early farmers came here. The megalith builders, that's kind of a mystery.
Right.
If they even did come from Sicily, because there's no precursor to it, to the building activity. But the farmers, I mean, I don't know. That obviously there's way more resources on Sicily. It's a much, much bigger set of islands.
Sure.
And the mainland is huge. It takes hours to drive across. And it's a little bit further north, so technically the climate and soil would be a little bit better, I guess. So I don't know. No one really knows. That's the thing. And I find that really fascinating about those early farmers that landed up here in 6000 BCE.
Sure.
And then the later megalith builders as well. What if there was a connection between those two cultures, and if they really all did come from Sicily, and why they decided to make the move, and where they learned how to do all of these things.
Sure. And I mean, who knows what the conditions were like on Earth at the time, and some regions could have been having issues or some sort of cataclysm or catastrophe that they had to deal with and move around and stuff like that. So, all right, we get into the temples, the Gigantea temples, and I'll pull the first one up here. And this is the slide, the external wall approaching from the northwest.
Yeah. So Gigantea is in Gozo, in the village of Shara. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's got an amazing museum attached to it. And, I mean, none of the trilithon entrances are intact, but there's a lot of structure there that survived since 3600 BCE. So one of the oldest temples on the islands. And what's fascinating about it is Shara, the village in Gozo, where you find these two temples. That village itself has so many interesting megalithic sites. So it has the Shara stone circle, which is a hypogeum. It has the remains of a temple called the Santa Verna Temple. It's called that because a medieval chapel was built on it later. And then there are various scattered megaliths. There's a cave which has temple period pottery sherds in it. There's what could be a dolmen, but it's never been excavated. So experts aren't sure if it's actually natural, but it's protected just in case. So that plateau itself, just that one village, has so many sites. And it's super fascinating. Like, was that a hub, or is it just that every kind of area of Malta and Gozo was covered in megaliths? It's just that some of them didn't survive. Because it does look like there was a very intense amount of monuments throughout the islands.
You mentioned like a period where people kind of just disappeared, or there's just no like records of anything. Do you think it could have been a situation similar to maybe Easter Island, where they just kind of were locked on the island and they ran out of resources and that kind of a thing? Or do you think it's something where they were just moving around, or possibly just island hopping at that point?
Well, this monograph I read recently, I don't think they have an explanation for the 5th millennium hiatus, the gap between the farmers and the megalith builders. They do have some rough idea about why the temple people disappeared later on, because there's a gap between when the temple people left and the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age settlers came into the island and they're a completely fresh population.
Right.
And that was to do with environmental degradation, essentially. But that earlier one, no, it doesn't seem to be any explanation for it. I mean, you can sort of surmise that might have been the case, that they just went to find better resources elsewhere.
Right.
But I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. That's why, there's a lot. I think there's probably more mystery surrounding Malta than there is a lot of other European. I mean, you can look at like Skara or Stonehenge or, a lot of these other sites. But I think this one, at least to me, invokes a lot more mystery.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. We got the first, is it apes? Apes? How do you pronounce that? A-P-S-E? Apes. On the right in the South Temple. And apse is just like a circular cutout, right? Like I think in church, it's used in church building or churches.
Yeah, exactly. So apse just means semicircular. And all of the temple sites, more or less, well, all the temples are semicircular and usually symmetrical. So you walk through the entrance and there's 2 apses, one on either side, and then another 2 apses, and then one at the very end of the corridor, which is either a full semicircular apse or a niche, which they suppose they had statues in or something like that, or an altar. But there are also more irregular structures, irregular lobed structures, and some rectangular buildings. But the majority of the megalithic sites are like this, and each apse, some are undecorated, but many that are still fairly intact. You can see steps going in and orthostats and what looks like altars. In this one that we can see on the screen, a single betel was found. So just a stone monolith was found in there, which is in the museum at the moment. And obviously the relevance of that, no one knows.
Right. And you can
But
see,
it's presumed it was ritual activity of some kind.
right. And it looks like there's some Cyclopean masonry. Obviously, this was probably earlier than Mycenae, but I mean that's what that's what I would call it. Obviously, I mean even if it predates Mycenae and a lot of the stonework there, but that's what it looks like to me. It looks like they just filled in a bunch of little cracks. But like in terms of what do you think these sites were used for? Did they have a religion? Was it more like idol worship? Was it more paganistic style worship kind of a thing? Like, what do you think was going on?
Well, I mean, the theory is that they were practicing some sort of animal sacrifice and ritual feasting. And that was, I mean, for what purpose, we don't know. But I'm interested in the intersection between ritual symbolism and practicality. I mean, the people had to eat, right? So there is a practical aspect. If the monuments were aligned with the solstices and equinoxes, which it looks as though some of them were, then that would also make sense because early farmers needed to monitor the calendar. But then there's lots of things that don't make sense, like decorated altars and figurines, and it's highly possible that there was a ritualistic aspect in that. So, I mean, I'm not sure, and no one is 100% sure, but it does look like there is an intersection between ritual and practical purpose of the temples, and the kind of the symbolism. There's quite a lot of symbols as well that you find within them. So yeah, no one really knows, but it's fascinating to think, was it like a fully fledged religion? Like what? Obviously, they were not domestic sites. The experts have found domestic sites. So they do see these as being something that people visited for ritualistic purposes and group feasting. But what that entailed, we don't know. And even the hypogea, so the Shara stone circle, it does look as though it was definitely used for burial only. But the House Saplieni hypogeum looks to have had a mixed use. So partly for burials and partly for ritual. And personally, I kind of get excited about the idea whenever I've been to the Hypergeum, is I kind of see it as being to do with some sort of initiations or something like that.
Sure.
It's really spooky down there.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I have a picture of the interior entrance so you can kind of see. And there's a lot of speculation that it resonates at certain frequencies, and maybe it's a great place to like meditate or alter your consciousness in some way. As you mentioned, probably associated with some sort of ritual or initiation.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, when you go down there, it's a supervised tour of 10 people, and obviously you don't get to go around on your own and meditate and see what noises things make. But
right.
But yeah, it's definitely, there's a lot of experiments been done down there, so it's quite interesting to think it could have been for something like that.
All right, now we pulled up the hearth. So what's going on here? So
most of the sites have these hearths, which must have been for preparing food for the sacrifice, and from the sacrifice or for the feast. I mean, there's evidence of burn marks in these hearths.
Do you think that? Do you think that these temples were set up more like a? I mean, because there are similar sites, I think, like I mentioned, Scarborough, there are some that have hearths and similar building structures. And actually, there are some symbols, too. You mentioned symbolism. I noticed there's some of those, like, galaxy-looking spirals found on Malta and some of the etchings. And there's also, that's found at, like, Newgrange in Ireland. So there are some similarities. But what do you think's going on in terms of the way that they built? Was there a specific symbolism, almost like a temple of man from Egypt, like a I don't even know, like a Schwaller de Lubitz style symbolism within the building, kind of a thing, or do you think it was just more functional?
I don't know. I mean, the spiral motifs, they all look kind of decorative, and the pitted motifs, those are the two most common. So you've got lots and lots of spirals at Tarshian, and nearly every temple site has these has pitted megaliths in it. Could just be decorative, or it could be something to do with, cycle of life. I don't know, or the stars, because the pitting looks a bit like the cosmos. So, I mean, it's open to interpretation. There are also sites where there are a lot of animal carvings, which would make sense if they were ritualistic sites where animal sacrifice was taking place.
It's interesting. And have they found like animal bone fragments in these temples or near the hearths?
Yes. There's a lot of animal bones, flint knives for preparing the food. Loads of pottery, really large, giant vessels, like huge, almost as big as me. Wow. And but they're quite cool because they have like at Tarshian, there's one that's got like a little cup, or it's a cup handle on the side, but obviously it cannot be picked up,
right?
Because it's absolutely giant stone vessel. But that would make sense if they were doing group feasting. That would make sense. Sorry, I'm having issues with my tripod. It's playing with me today.
No, you're okay.
I know this is live, but I'm having to play around.
No,
with
it's
otherwise,
this is.
I'm going to go completely out of view soon.
This is what happens with the live show. You've got to, make it work. You got to make it work on the go, and we'll have you on again. So even if we don't get to everything or it doesn't, sound perfect, we'll definitely next time.
I don't have a producer. I am the producer.
Yeah.
So many tables and laptop and camera and phone and
tripod
and light.
If you ever need technical advice, I'm here. We're here to help. If you have any questions, that's for sure.
That would be great. Because I bought a microphone and it's not working, so I'm having to use my phone one. So these giant vessels are intriguing. Okay, that's fine. They make sense. Of course, you're going to have giant vessels if, as a group, you come together to do this ritual feasting. But they also have these tiny, tiny vessels.
Right.
So small, which must have held something special, like a condiment or or alcohol or something that would only be taken in small doses.
I mentioned to you maybe even possibly like an entheogen or some sort of mind-altering substance. And I know even Peganum harmala, which is found all over the Middle East and that region, is an MAOI inhibitor. So even just taking that would, change your serotonin or your gut receptors, your enzymes, so it doesn't break down. So you're more likely to experience, things that have psychoactive compounds in them. So I don't, obviously we know about the Eleusinian mysteries, and there's a bunch of other ancient sites and civilizations that have been associated with entheogens and psychedelics. But it's interesting to speculate too, because, just because one civilization does something doesn't necessarily mean even a close by civilization is doing something similar. So.
Oh yeah, and this had to be something special that was in these small pots. So it's entirely possible. I don't think any experiments have ever been done or any substances have been found. Similar thing when it comes to we'll get to it on the slides, but the libation holes. At the threshold to many temples, or the threshold to an apse, you have to walk across a paving slab that's got loads of holes in it. So it's a bit inconvenient, impractical. And experts used to say, their favorite theory was that these were for pouring libations of some sort of liquid when you enter. But now they're not sure. There was this theory, once again, in the monograph Temple Places of the Phraxis project. It was suggested in there that maybe they were for wooden stakes and had skulls on top or something, like animal skulls. So
were they making wine or were they making beer?
They have no idea.
No idea.
Okay. I don't think any of that sort of research has been done here. I can't find any.
Right. Has there ever been any evidence of growing wheat or grain on the island?
Yes.
Okay. Well, because
there's loads of work on the agricultural side of it.
Because then you could definitely, obviously, make beer if you have yeast, and even in Egypt, that's how they find. You'll find the bread maker next to the brewery, obviously, because of the yeast. And I know here, even as I mentioned, psychedelics, Claviceps purpurea, the precursor to LSD, is actually grown on grain. So that's how they've looked into the entheogen use with the Eleusinian mysteries. So just grain in itself is huge, in terms of figuring that out. Let's go to the next one here, the hinge.
Yeah, so in most of the temple sites, you see these holes. They're actually joined. They're like a tunnel. And the experts say they must have been for, it's kind of like primitive hinges, which held a material that blocked the entranceway, and that material is now decomposed. Maybe it was, wood or leather or something. And the hinges are always like opposite each other. So, and some doors or orthostats on the side of the doors have loads of them. So it would indicate that certain apses were shielded from the audiences. And sometimes you have like several stages as you go through the temple where you have all these barriers to entry. So it's as if there was some sort of a ritual or ceremony taking place. And, maybe started that certain people had access to maybe just the first apse. And then once they, I don't know, went through, let's say, an initiation, or they, or if they were linked with like the priestly group that kind of ran the temple, they could go into the further apses or niches, which were really shielded off from the general audience.
Right. What about, so like in terms of like cutting the blocks and creating these holes and cutting out these little, round hinges, were they using stone? Obviously, because before the Bronze Age, you didn't really have metallurgy that would have allowed them to really get in there. I don't know what kind of stone that is. I guess it depends on the hardness of the stone. But were they using other stone tools, like you mentioned earlier, like flint? Were they using like those kinds of stone tools, or do you think that they had some sort of soft metal that they somehow incorporated into making this stuff?
I mean, I think they found a lot of obsidian.
Okay.
Obsidian tools, and obsidian isn't found on Malta. So it seems that these people were importing obsidian from volcanic islands in the area.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's obviously a lot harder. And the limestone here, the worked limestone, like globigerina, it's very soft. So that would actually be quite easy to do.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And I know, I mean, some people even debate, even in Egypt or like the Bronze Age, or how were these people using these? Because the debate I know in Egypt is the copper tools that they supposedly used had like a small percentage of arsenic, but a lot of people, claim that there's no way that you could, and I think people have even tried to recreate it, but those holes, those like perfect cutout holes in granite, that would take you forever to cut one of those holes using just a piece of copper with a little bit of arsenic in it. So, I mean, and something like this, like you mentioned, the stone's a little bit softer, so maybe it's not as big of a mystery, but I still find it fascinating.
Well, I mean, I still think it's impressive because remember, there isn't just one temple. I mean, there are so many, and it looks like there could have been even hundreds across the islands, many contemporary with each other. And aside from obviously moving and erecting megaliths, which is very difficult and should be kind of impossible for the Neolithic period, you have all of these finely carved figurines. You have these holes that are obviously done for practical or functional purposes. You have menhirs that just don't have a structural function, huge menhirs just stuck against the side of buildings. You have portals, loads of these portals that are carved out, which I think must be quite difficult to do from a structural perspective. So it is a bit of a mystery as to how they managed all of that. But that's the same with all megalithic cultures. I mean, Malta has its own unique characteristics,
right,
attributable to the megalithic period. But in general, as with all the other megalithic sites globally, no one really knows how they managed to pull it off.
Yeah. And it does have its own very distinct like look too, just even like the style and the architecture and just even the look of the rock and like the fine detail. It just kind of has its own thing compared to other European prehistory and Bronze Age sites. All right, let's get to this hole for the door barrier here.
Yeah, so you have also not necessarily a hinge, but this hole, there's one on the orthostat on the opposite side of that corridor, and it looks as though something was put through them, like to make a barrier to the entrance to the last three apses.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's quite, and there's a few that are like that.
That's a deep, that's a thick hole. I mean, that's the stone, for anybody that's listening, is really thick, and there's just a giant hole through it, and it looks kind of precise. It doesn't look like it was like laser cut or anything like that, but it does look like it's pretty precise.
Exactly. So that's quite interesting. And I've mentioned before on my video, apart from these holes, there's so many holes in the temples that no one really knows what they're for. So there's the hole they call the oracle hole, which is where the experts assume that a person of, like, let's say an elite person or a priest or whatever was inside talking to an audience outside through the hole, potentially doing something divinatory, which is why they call it the oracle hole. But obviously there's no way of knowing what those oracle holes were really used for. And then I've noticed also at various sites, I just call them viewing holes, just holes that just don't seem to have a structural purpose and are just like in a megalith on the outside of the building. And I always wonder if that's to view stars or something, especially because when you look through them, you can see certain hills in the distance and notches on the hills and gaps with the valleys. And, there are lots of landmarks that could have been used for that. So that's something I wonder about. And then obviously the libation holes I mentioned before. So, I mean, in reality, there's names given to all of these things. They all have labels, but no one really knows what they were for, or if they were all linked, or if they were to do with ritual or structure. I mean, even this might not be for a door barrier. It could have been for something totally different.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, there's all sorts of, I'm sure, weird explanations that you could go down. Let's move on here to what you were mentioning earlier, which is the libation holes. Mm-hmm.
I can't find any research. I mean, I would like to talk to some of the experts on this, but these they don't seem to have excavated any of these holes. Got the soil out, seen how deep they go, and see if there's any kind of substance or remnants of a substance in there. I can't find anything on that, but I would like to talk to a few people and see if there's any research being done or likely to be done in the future on that. So it's fascinating that so many sites have these.
So since you live there and you're able to just go to these sites, do you have to take a tour, or can you just go to these sites?
Oh, no, only the Hypogeum, the House Applieni Hypogeum, you have to take a tour. The other sites that are open to the public, you just get a ticket and go.
And do they ever have, like, is there something, like, do they have a lot of, like, archaeological information on these sites, or like how is this being presented to the public?
I mean, some do. The UNESCO World Heritage sites are great because they've got the huge museums attached, and lots of information going around.
Okay.
But some of the smaller sites, I mean, obviously not. And then some are close to the public. So I've made appointments to go and see those.
That's interesting.
Well, that's pretty cool that they trust people not to break anything.
Oh, they have lots of security.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you make an appointment, which anybody can do, they just contact Heritage Malta and they can be allowed access to a site. Usually a security person is there all the time anyway, and then someone else will come and like let you in.
That's cool.
But those sites are difficult to make out, obviously, because they're still being excavated and it's just like lots of ruins. But these other ones are quite well laid out. The only thing is that obviously a lot of areas are roped off. And you're just thinking, a bit like when you go to a castle and you want to see what's behind the door, and you just want to go and look at the areas that are behind the ropes.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so here we have the presumed altar structure. And are those, I mean, it looks like there's maybe 4 little structures with lentils on top. But it looks like maybe one separated in the middle, which kind of reminded me of, like, you know, the 3 openings and, you know, some of the pyramids and, you know, how the connections at the bottom and stuff like that. It kind of gave me that kind of a vibe when I was looking at this site.
It does look a bit like that. And I mean, the word altar is used quite loosely because we still don't know what sort of rituals were taking place in the temples, or whether they actually were being used as what we consider to be altars. But there are so many different types of altar as well. So you have this structure with like these vertical slabs, orthostats, with horizontal slabs laid on top. And then there are other more decorative altars. And then there's like a mushroom-shaped one. And then there's one that's trapezoid-shaped. So it's kind of strange because you think, what were they doing? Why did they need so many different types of altar?
Yeah.
And what was really taking place there? And were they altars?
And how much of a time gap is there between like this one and that first altar that we saw in the slideshow?
Which was the first one? The apse. The first apse.
Yeah, Gigantea.
So these are the same. These are the same temple. These are both in Gigantea.
Okay.
And they're both built at the same time. So that the South Temple at Gigantea was built in around 3,600 BCE. Yeah. And then the North Temple was built a bit later. Like I think they dated it about 100 years later. Which even then, if you think about it, you're talking several generations. So it's still quite a time gap. And why did they add to the temples or build more temples? And yeah, this is quite interesting because I've mentioned this as well before. Most of the temples, they don't just come on their own. They come with more than one structure, some kind of irregular structures, or several very clear apsidal temples around like a forecourt. But then that complex is usually near another complex. They're almost like clustered into zones. And sometimes there are age differences between them, and sometimes they're contemporary with one another. So, and if there really were that many in Malta at that time, what was going on? Because if these were ritual centers to support local farming communities, how big did these farming communities have to be? First of all, to have the resources and labor to build this stuff, and second of all, to use it, because you're thinking that's a pretty big population that would be able to build it and that would need to use this many temples, with temple is
Right.
also used quite loosely. It seems strange, just the fact there's so many on such a small island.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of interesting. And to point out anybody that's listening, we're looking at a picture of an altar, and it looks similar actually to like 3 mini portaras of Naxos from Greece, kind of stacked next to each other with some large megalithic stones separating them. That's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from this. Let's keep it moving here, though, because I know we have a certain amount of time and we have a decent amount of slides left. Here's just another picture of it, like a further back picture, so you can kind of see. And again, you have Cyclopean masonry kind of surrounding the structure. Is there some stylistic thing that has to do with all those like little holes that are found carved into some of these sites? I've seen it a few times, and there's that one. There's that one site. I think it's the one I have as my background right now when people are watching this in the beginning of this. But yeah, there's like those like little like divots that they carved into the lentil and then the side stones. I don't know if that means anything or.
I have no idea.
Okay.
Probably something structural, though, I would think.
Okay, how do you pronounce this now? Is it Hagar Kim?
Hajarim.
Hajarim. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we get to the Hajarim temples here.
I mean, even me, look at me laughing. I'm sure that all my Maltese friends will be watching and thinking, Laura, that isn't how you say it. But it's closer than what you're going to manage. So let's just leave it at that.
Well, like I mentioned, I'll mention it again. It's just, it's a very interesting language, and the structure of it and the pronunciations and everything. So obviously it's very different than a lot of other places in Europe in that sense. But all right, so here we have the external altar and the oracle hole.
So this is quite an interesting section at Hajarim because it's an external altar, which is not usual in the temples, and it's got this trapezoid altar shape. I mean, that's also, I haven't seen that anywhere else. And then the hole on the right, which you can just make out, that's what is referred to as the oracle hole. It's quite low down, and it seems strange to think that there was some sort of a priest figure inside that apse talking through that hole. I don't know, but it's a theory. And then to the far right of that, you can see that menhir, which doesn't have a structural function, and it's just kind of stuck to the outside wall of the temple, the main temple at Hajarim. So it had to. I mean, this is what I find interesting. Okay, if the ancients said, right, we're going to build these giant megalithic structures because they last a long time. Small bricks don't last as long. This is why we want to do it. Let's say they did it for purely practical reasons and they wanted it to last generations, which, it did. But then why these menhirs and why betils and why all these like random stone blocks which are not related to the structure? There had to have been something ritualistic in how they worked with stone and appreciated it.
Absolutely.
And I don't know what that association would be, but there seems to be like some kind of, well, it's a strong word, but like stone worship or something.
And so how, in terms of like the oracle, is it kind of similar, like when people talk about or what you've heard, is it similar to like the Oracle of Delphi in a way? Because I know, I guess my follow-up would be, is there any sort of natural gases? Is it near faults, or is there volcanic activity in the area? Because I know that's one of the theories of the Oracle of Delphi, is that natural gases were coming up from the ground and the oracle would inhale them and they were psychedelic, and then she would come up with some visions and then tell whoever the king or the visitor was what they're seeing or experiencing. Is it similar to that, or is it just more just a priest or priestess?
I mean, there doesn't seem to be any. Well, it's not a volcanic island, and there is a lot of fault lines and stuff, and they've noticed that some of these temples were built near springs that have long since dried up, but there would have originally been springs there. And then you can sort of think, okay, that it's practical to be near a water source for agriculture, and obviously for the people attending the temple to drink water. And at the same time, because in later mythology, water and water nymphs became, a really important part of classical antiquity and these later cultures, basically, you could say, okay, maybe that has its origin in these Neolithic people, and they worshipped water in a way, or they had some sort of rituals to do with springs. But in terms of gases, I mean, I haven't heard anything to do with that, and I wouldn't think so. But one thing I've noticed about the Oracle of Delphi, because I went there once sightseeing, and it's one heck of a walk to the top.
I'm
and
sure.
I just think those people were fit. Like they really wanted to get their reading, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, the Greeks did pride themselves on their fitness, and obviously it's where the Olympics came from and everything. So
yeah, crikey, it's insane. But this, yeah, I mean, we don't know if it was really used for oracles as such, or if it was being used to create some sort of communication between like a holy inner area and an outside.
do they think the top was like?
area.
Do you think that was enclosed, or like everything was covered except for the hole?
Yeah.
Or? Okay.
It's thought there was a roof, because you can see corbelling on some of the structures, so it looks like they originally had a roof. I always wondered this though. I always think maybe there wasn't a roof, a totally covered roof. Maybe they had the small holes like the oculus in the middle. I don't know, just something.
And I wouldn't think it would be like an observatory either, or like some sort of astronomical observatory like some other sites have, where you can kind of look through a portal or like a hole and it kind of looks towards the stars. This one's very ground level. To anybody that's listening, it's you'd be looking kind of just straight on, like probably like a foot or two off the ground. All right, so here we get the men here with no structural function.
Yep. And there's the stone benches on either side of it. Well, they are also referred to as benches without really their purpose being known. But it's thought that people, when they were coming to do whatever they were doing at the temple, they waited on the benches outside, because there's so many of these like stone benches going around the outside of the temples.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And I threw a slide in there later, but there's a bench with the goddess mother kind of feet at the bottom, which is like holding the bench up, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's like half statue, half bench, pretty much.
In Tarshian.
All right. Hajar Keem, is that correct?
Keem.
All right.
You leave out the Q.
Okay. Hajar.
The strange thing in Maltese, there's a lot of letters that you just don't pronounce.
Sure.
So it's not too bad if when you're learning, if you read it written down, okay. But then when people start talking, it's just too many missing letters.
And this looks like another one of those apses, kind of like a circular cutout. And I know this wasn't one of yours, so we'll keep it moving. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Well, that's the oracle hole there. That's the oracle hole from the inside of the apse. So what you can see next to the trapezoid altar in the previous slide, this is the inside. That's
interesting, because it looks completely different. It looks like there's more space when you're looking at it from the outside, like more cutout to see around it. But on this view, it looks like it's way more enclosed.
Exactly. Strange.
Here we have those spirals I was mentioning, which, like I meant, can be found at other European megalithic sites. Specifically, I know Newgrange has a ton of them in Ireland. And obviously, I think some people have speculated, obviously it has to do with like astronomical, or like the stars, basically like some sort of symbolism for that, or spiral galaxy, tracking the stars, that kind of a thing. Do they know what these were? Is there any speculations on what these were at Malta?
No, I mean, I haven't really come across much information on the ones here. It's just sort of surmised they could be decorative. Personally, I think there's definitely something symbolic going on there.
Okay.
But I'm not sure what. And I mean, the thing with motifs is they can develop in different places independently. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's a connection between Malta and Newgrange. But I don't know, the ancients were pretty obsessed with certain symbols.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
And here's the thing is like, whether you want to look at these things from an alternative perspective or a mainstream archaeological perspective, mainstream archaeology says that all these different pyramids and all around the world popped up at the same time because that's just what the consciousness of humanity was at the time. So even if there wasn't people getting around, actually, becoming, coming in contact with each other, different civilizations, that could be the explanation too. That's just where human consciousness was at the time. We're tracking stars or galaxies or whatever, and we're using symbolism to kind of convey what they were experiencing through their consciousness, looking at the night sky, kind of a thing. So
yeah, I mean, it's possible, but I don't know. I'm still drawn to the idea that there's some sort of a connection. I'm just not sure. I'll show them something, and they'll say, "Oh, did you never ever? Didn't you think it could be this?" And I think, "Oh, wow!" And because everybody comes from different backgrounds in terms of their skill set and knowledge, you can really get some interesting insights that way.
Sure. All right, here we have the North Temple.
Now this is at Hajar-im. So you've got the main temple, which you can walk around, where the oracle hole is, and then the North Temple, you can't access that one. It's quite far, like 30 meters away from the main temple, and it's all roped off. But yeah, it's quite striking because you can see the threshold at the entrance, and obviously one huge menhir that's still remaining. So, and
is it all the same stone too at all the sites, or is there like granite quarries, or is it all just one type of stone?
It's all limestone, but different types of limestone.
Okay.
So, sorry, I'm not good at pronouncing this, but Globigerina and Upper Coralline.
Yeah.
Upper Coralline is the one that's coarser and more difficult to work with.
Gotcha.
So that tends to be used for walls if it was the nearest rock available, but then for the interior of the temples, for the furniture and carvings, usually Globigerina was used, and that was then brought from further away if necessary.
Okay. That's interesting. All right, here we have the portal entrance to an apse, and you can kind of see there that cutout, which is, again, kind of interesting.
I love these because they're so small. It's really hard to show on camera, but they're really quite difficult to fit through, mostly.
Yeah, how big is that cutout? Like, would you say it's 3 feet?
Like shorter than me, yeah, like 3 or 4 feet.
Okay, so you'd have to kind of crouch down to kind of get through it.
And then of course that instead of a doorway, there are portals, so you have to lift your feet up to climb through. And there are loads of them in the temples, and in Tarshian especially, there's some really good examples. And this one is in Hajar-im, and there was also in Amnidra near Hajar-im. And I just find it strange, like. It's not useful. They're not practical, and there must have been some reason why they did that.
Right. Yeah, because it's not like a normal doorway where you have the side stones and then like a lentil on top or something like that. Like this is, and actually they have used that, as we showed that one site at Gigantia, the altar area that had what I'm talking about. So this is something, like you mentioned, maybe something completely different that had something to do with a ritual or some weird thing that we're just not aware of.
Exactly.
All right, so here we have the Trilithon entrance, which is exactly what I was talking about, which would be the side stones with the lentil on top, and it looks very thick and very sturdy.
Yeah, and this is Hajar-im. Hajar-im is unusual because normally you go through the first entrance, and there is only one entrance, and then you have the apses on the side, and then, as I said before, either a terminal apse or a niche at the end of the corridor. But this one has another exit at the end of the corridor. And also, one of the apses seems to have been opened up and turned into a sort of a corridor, and then there's another 4 apses tacked on. So the theory is that it went through a period of remodeling at some point in its history. Okay. And since the temple people were here for more than 1,000 years, which is many generations, I guess it makes sense that their rituals changed, or what they needed the temples for.
What's the heaviest block? Like, do they have like some block that's just by far the heaviest that they don't have any knowledge of a way to move it or anything like that?
I think it is one of the ones at Hajar-im, which is 56 tons.
Wow.
Yeah.
Still not as big as the blocks in Giza, but that's still pretty impressive, especially since you probably have way less of a population to figure out how to get that thing around.
And this is older. Or,
Yeah, a lot older.
Or maybe not.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. And they just found that piece
yeah.
of wood, right? That lady, some woman archaeologist in, I believe, Scotland found a piece of wood from the Great Pyramid that was used that dates back, I think it was like 500 to 1,000 years older than the dating of the pyramids in Giza. So
it's fascinating. I think that's what when I first started reading books on ancient history, it was all about Egypt and hieroglyphs and everything. I was just absolutely fascinated by it. And that's what then drew me into getting to know more about the past.
And again, we got a few more slides here, but I just want to point out, please go check out Laura's channel on YouTube. It's great. They're short but concise and very information-packed videos. So if you like this kind of stuff, definitely go check it out. And she goes through some of the more controversial things and sites that are found on Malta. So go check that out. And I have the link down below. So this is kind of what I was talking about, these little divots that are carved into the doorway or the portal at, I don't know, is it Najra and Rendi? Is that?
Najra is right next to Hajraim. It's like 500 meters away.
Okay.
So it's the same UNESCO World Heritage Site. So you go first to the museum, then you enter Hajraim, and then you go downhill 500 meters to Najra. And on a hot day, it's quite a climb back up.
Yeah, so there's these decorative like little dimples that are kind of carved in, and you don't know, they don't have any idea what that is, just decorative or.
Well, I mean, they could be decorative, could be to do with the cosmos and stars.
Yeah.
But these ones are not so interesting because they do look mostly decorative.
Right.
But there are two other orthostats on the side of an altar in Niger where there are these like drill marks, and there's just a few of them, and they're all they're in lines as if they're a counting system, and more are going to be added. So those ones are really interesting, and they're not. They definitely cannot be decorative. They must have been for something, right. But no one really knows what. And if you read up on it, people say it had to be something to do with counting, either a calendar or something to do with the stars. Or
that makes
like
sense.
that.
I actually kind of was thinking about something like something similar to that, like counting the years or days or something like that. But again, I'll point this out, and you mentioned this earlier. You have the lintel with the large stones on each side, and then you also have a portal within that, which is kind of interesting. Like, what's the function? There is no real functionality of that. If you wanted to just create a doorway, you wouldn't put that portal in the middle of it.
Well, no, it'd be a pain, wouldn't it? And to climb through, and then you've got like two altars, like an altar behind it, and then another altar on top, which is called altars, but we don't know if they were. It's just impractical. So it definitely has to have some sort of symbolic purpose. Like maybe when you enter through it, there's a certain kind of ritual that takes place, and there needs to be something that demarcates the line, the two worlds. So whatever you're practicing on this side, and then whatever you're practicing on that side, there has to be something to demarcate that. That's the only thing I can think of.
Here we get to, I threw this one here. Is it Tarjin? Is that?
Tarshian.
All right, Tarshian. You have the mother goddess, the bottom there. You can see those two feet. And then you have, like what you mentioned earlier, kind of like a bench on top. So, is that some sort of symbolism, obviously, for, the almost like how the Venus is the symbol for like a, pregnant woman or, something like that. Do they have any explanations for this kind of stuff there? Or?
No, but you find that the experts and the archaeologists, they kind of don't like to talk about goddess worship because they technically could be androgynous symbols. It's not really clear.
Okay.
Of course, there's a possibility that they were fertility goddesses or something to do with Mother Nature, or maybe they represented an elite class that was in charge of this culture. It's not really no one really knows.
And you mentioned earlier possible like stone worship. So if that's, that could represent something like that, like some sort of mother goddess associated with the
But
stone worship.
You've got so many of them as well, because you've got giant ones like this, which unfortunately there's not much of this one left, but it would have been a lot taller than me. So you've got these huge statues, then there's the smaller figurines, then some of them are headless and have little holes where it looks as though heads were just sort of inserted.
Sure.
So then you could say, okay, is that because the priest or priestess changes, so they change the head according to who's in the role, or something like that, maybe? I don't know. And I've been kind of working out some of my own theories on this, but I haven't. It's a bit tricky to articulate it at this point because I still want to do some research on it. But I've got kind of a new idea I'm working on.
Okay. Well, I'm sure she'll come out with a nice video.
It just
for
sort
her
of
channel,
came to me one day, and I thought, yeah, I think. But it's really difficult to articulate. So I'll save it. But yeah, I think personally that there was definitely something very. Okay, so everyone's like, why were they corpulent figurines? Okay, is it because it was to show that they were not hungry, and that they were the elite, so therefore they were well-fed and wealthy, or something like that? Or had it got something to do with fertility? Because at various points in history, there's been this kind of theory that larger women or larger-breasted women might be more fertile, but that's like obviously not true scientifically. But in the past, some cultures may have believed that, and that might have been that's one of the theories about the Paleolithic Venus figurines. So there's quite but the fact, I just think there's a much more interesting reason why they were corpulent, and that's what I'm working on explaining, because that kind of gets left out. The whole being drawn to the fact there's a giant statue of potentially a woman is drawn everyone into this whole Mother Nature goddess thing. But I think there's something a bit more interesting going on.
All right. That sounds fascinating.
I'll let you know when
I'm
able to articulate it properly. We can do another show.
I'm not even going to, is this Ta Agrat in Emjar?
Tahagrat, yeah.
Okay. And this one's actually like a massive portal or doorway with the lentil on top that looks like it's very oversized compared to the rest of the blocks.
Yeah.
What's going on? Is this the entrance into the main site there, or?
Tahagrat's quite a small site, and there's nothing really decorative there.
Okay.
It's quite strange, really. It's kind of seen as more of a primitive temple.
It looks like more primitive than the other sites that we've seen, for sure.
But it's contemporary with them, and it's trefoil. There's just 3 apses. So you walk in and there's an apse on either side. There's an apse at the end. And then there's like this irregular lobed building to the right. But it's still pretty impressive, like the entranceway, the stairs. And to the left of this entrance is a really big megalith as well.
Okay.
I'm not sure how much it weighs or what it's predicted to weigh, but it's huge. It's about, 7 foot, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Huge in Malta, So
sure.
Definitely. So it's seen as a more primitive one, but it is contemporary with Gigantea, and it's still impressive when you approach it. So, but then inside it's simple, just 3 apses, and none of them seem to be decorated. And there's only a few finds from this site. So
interesting.
Strange.
All right, so this is the interesting one, and I think we'll try and have you back on sometime in the near future. Maybe we'll do like a part 2, because there's just a ton of stuff that we're not even really going to get to on this one. But I appreciate your time and sending me those pictures ahead of time and everything. But this is the hypogeum, and that's Al-Safan. Is it
Al-Saflieni?
Saflieni. All right. Yeah. That's actually one of the more phonetical looking ones out of all of those. But okay, so here you have the entrance. This is kind of an old picture, I believe.
It's not the entrance. That's
no, not the entrance.
No, when you go down into the hypogeum, so it's on 3 levels, and on one of the levels, I believe this is the second one, you have this carving. It doesn't really go anywhere. It's just looks like an overground temple. So it's carved to look like it, but
so that doorway or that portal doesn't go anywhere.
No, I don't think so. No, it's just a a door to nowhere kind
Which
of
is
thing.
even more bizarre. Now I want to look into it even more now that I know
And when
that.
you go down there, you can't really get to this. Like you're a little bit distant from it, and it's just like you just want to go up and have a nose around. But even the corbelling look on the route. So this is one of the other reasons. There are several reasons why they think the overground temples were roofed, because of corbelling, the remains of corbelling.
Yeah.
Because a figurine was found of a temple which had a roof, and because of a carving a niger in one of the megaliths that shows it with a roof. And then this looks as if it's copied that overground temple corbelling for whatever reason we don't know. And that's and the House Saflieni Hypogeum could have had mixed use, as I said, maybe at different times in its history. So it could have been used for burials, but it could also have been used for similar rituals to whatever was going on above ground.
So actually here I'll pull up, this is a map of kind of the structure as it goes down. You're right. It looks like that part is kind of like a dead end, kind of like an offshoot or something. But so when people say like, oh, like resonates, or is that the main chamber at the very bottom where a lot of the skulls and skeletons and everything have been found? Is that where people think all that weird stuff happens?
No, just on the second level down.
Okay.
You can't access the bottom layer. That's not open for tours. And strangely enough, there was never any bones found on the lowest level. But on the first and the second levels, they did find bones and skulls. And
supposedly people have disappeared exploring those caves, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was a story, but it's not really. There's nothing really to substantiate it. There's just, I think, just one kind of reference to it.
Right. And you did a video on that, which people should check out on your channel.
Yeah. But the Hypogeum is, I mean, from what I understand, it's totally excavated. So the tunnels don't really go anywhere. But it is strange in Malta because the catacombs and loads of natural caves, because it's a limestone island. So you do get
do you think
lots
this was
and
used
lots
maybe
of these.
For like protection against some sort of cataclysm or some sort of event, or maybe a warring, other similar civilization that nearby, something like that?
Yeah, could be. And it's like obviously natural caves, because there are so many on the island that have been carved out, turned into something. And there is like a sort of a room, which when you go into it, there's this is where they say that if you make a sound, it vibrates at a certain frequency.
Okay.
And there's a few rooms or chambers throughout the second level. So but it's very creepy. And there's lots of like some red ochre on the wall and some checkerboard patterns and lots
that
of
I
stuff
find
that survived.
The checkerboard I find fascinating. That's an archetype that's obviously associated with a lot of different things, whether psychedelic realms and Freemasonry and like all sorts of different things. That's like an archetype that's found throughout history.
Exactly. I mean, it's not easy to make out. That last time I went there, I mean, I can't find any photos of it, and the tour guide mentioned it, and I was straining to see what they were referring to, because it's quite worn. But you would expect that. I mean, it's 5,000 years old. But this is where the figurine of the sleeping lady was found.
Okay.
And there's a theory that it was actually like a goddess dreaming or in a trance-like state before she gives an oracle or something. I don't know. There could be many reasons why she was sleeping down there. I think I do like the idea of it being kind of some sort of initiation thing, just like in classical antiquity you have all these different initiation exercises and incubation, and where people go into caves for long periods. Could be something like that,
right.
But further back in time. Or, as you say, potentially there was something that we don't know about that happened back then.
Right.
Some sort of cataclysm, or where they needed to protect themselves. They built this like mini underground temple and tried to bring everything they did underground.
Right.
And there could be many more of them. I mean, there's the House Saflieni, the Shara stone circling Gozo, which it does look like it was just a necropolis. It's not quite the same. And then near House Saflieni, there's one called Santa Lucia, which has not been properly excavated. It's smaller, it's closed off to the public, and it hasn't been properly excavated. So, but they know it's from the same time period. So how many more could there be? I mean, it's really difficult
Right.
to say, because how would you know
No, that's interesting.
where to look?
Yeah, and I think that, as you mentioned, we just, got to keep looking into these things, and hopefully they excavate them, and, we can get a deeper look here. And obviously, once you get down into the deeper layers, I'm sure they'll find some interesting discoveries. Before we get out of here, though, let's wrap it up with this last little section here on the objects that, have been found on Malta. The first one is a decorated altar from Hajar Im. Did I pronounce it?
Yep, that's
okay.
right.
So here you actually have those little dimples that we were mentioning before. Is that like a little bowl on top, or like a cup, or what is that on top?
No, it's flat. It's just
Okay.
a pillar.
So is there any theory on what that could be symbolizing or anything? Or
I mean, I haven't really read much about this, but I always ask people on Instagram what they think. And the way that there's this kind of like spinal arrangement on all four sides. So the dimples, obviously you see them in all the temples, but there's this kind of spinal arrangement and the little bucket at the bottom. People have various theories on that. They say it could be a plant or a tree of life kind of thing, or represent the spine. And the thing at the bottom could be that similar to the handbags that you find in Mesopotamia
like old handbag.
South America.
Our favorite mystery.
So I don't know. It's interesting. But I think from the handbag theory, like these Mesopotamian handbag things, I think they're in Central America as well, right? So
they're fine. There's ones found at the top of Göbekli Tepe. I mean, pretty much anywhere you look in the ancient world, they can be found. Different, even there's different variations of them. Some look more like a handbags. Other ones look kind of similar, but maybe not the exact same thing. And I know there's been speculations that somebody bringing agriculture. There's some speculation that that's some sort of priest or priestess that's carrying some sort of entheogen or psychedelic. I mean, I've heard lots of different theories on that, so it's interesting. But yeah, that I didn't even think about that spine thing there in the middle.
And this is kind of the suggestions I've had from people. And I mean, I'm not sure which is my favorite, but I kind of like the bucket, the handbag idea, and I quite like that sort of a plant or a tree.
Right.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, so here we have a decorated altar from Tarjin.
Yeah, Tarjin. So here you've got the portal symbolism again, and then this little rock at the bottom can be removed, and behind it they found animal bones and a flint knife.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it looked like it was prepared.
And then again, you have that same lentil with doorway with the portal inside of it, which is what we just found 3 or 4 of them through the pictures we went through.
And the spiral motif once again. So when you go to these temples, you find the replicas of the altars, but the originals are in the museum. So when you go to the temples, it shows you where they were originally found, just randomly in an apps. And
so they were making like little model versions of stuff, the big things that they built, it looks like.
No, these are not small. This is huge.
Oh, this is
big? This is the original. It's huge. It's just, it's not easy to see on the picture.
How big is it?
Yeah.
Like how tall?
Oh, like as tall as me. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
For sure.
Okay.
Like 5 foot something.
It just looks tiny. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. And the other one, the one before that, the pillar with the leaf or spine thing, it's about half of me, like 2.5, 3 feet. And that was just found in the middle of an apse. And this other one at Tarshen, even though it's got a portal, it was just against a wall. So like you couldn't see through the portal or anything.
Gotcha. That's interesting. All right, here you have a figurine from, I'm not even going to pronounce, is it Shara? Okay.
Yeah.
Stone circle. This is the one that I thought looked kind of like a hybrid between something that's found in the Cyclades mixed with something that was found, one of the Minoan goddesses, and then mixed with, one of the stone statues found at Göbekli Tepe, kind of like a hybrid of all three. I kind of got that vibe from this.
Totally. I thought that, and I asked on Instagram what people thought about it, and nobody really had I said, what does this remind you of? Because I expected people to say that these kind of later cultures it would remind them of, and they didn't. But
Yeah.
I thought that, and yeah, it's because, and it also seems so different to all the other figurines that you have here. And this is at Shara Stone Circle, so that is close to the public. But because it's close to Gigantea, some of the figurines that they've found there, they've put into the Gigantea Museum.
Yeah, the Urfa Man, I think, is the one from Göbekli Tepe that I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
And we're actually in the middle of a Mysteries and Metaphysics series, and we're going to do one on the similarities between some of these cultures. But this is why I wanted to talk to you, too, because I don't really know too much about Malta, and was one of these blind spots in our ancient civilization research, and you just have like a ton of knowledge on these, on Malta, obviously. And you live there, which helps, too, but... I think again, it's one of those sites or islands surrounded in mystery for sure from antiquity. So this is a giant feasting vessel. How big is that?
I mean, it's about, maybe like 1.5 feet in height, or maybe even 2 or 3 feet could be. It's big, it's huge.
So it's like a big bowl, kind of.
Yeah, it's really big. Like, definitely wouldn't be able to pick it up or anything.
Have they taken any samples from it to try and figure out what it was? No? Too old?
No,
or too...
as far as I know, nothing like that. But this was found in the middle of an apse at Trashin, I think this one is. And I mean, giant feasting vessels make sense. That's fine. I just think it's funny that they would put a little cup handle on it when it clearly can't be carried.
Yeah.
So it's a cute little decorative feature.
Yeah, it looks like a giant teacup, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I was just curious because, more and more now when they've obviously found out that ancient people have been using psychoactive compounds, they've been like going back and taking samples. And I mean, I don't know if that they could get anything off of that stone, but it would be interesting to see if they could figure out, was it wine in there? Was it food? Was it, possibly an entheogen? I definitely think that's something that they should look into. And then you have like this Venus style statue without the head.
And there were just loads of these, like so many.
Is it called the Fat Lady statue?
Yeah, it's referred to as the Fat Lady statue. Statues and statuettes.
Yeah, and so this is obviously like, we're talking about the Venus and the fertility goddesses and different things. And I think the one Venus statue, like the original one, was found near Germany or something, was like 30,000 years old. It's pretty old, right? If I'm mistaken.
Yeah, they're like from the 25,000 to 30,000 years old. Oh no, and I just can't get my head around that, because that's thousands and thousands of years before Malta was even settled.
Well, yeah, and how would you think about maintaining some sort of information from right now today to 20,000 years from now? It sounds insane to even think about.
Exactly, but you see, it's strange, because in these periods like the Paleolithic and hunter-gatherer, you wouldn't expect people to be corpulent, because resources were limited. It was difficult. It was all about survival every day.
Right.
And there was a lot of physical activity involved in trying to find food and trying to get water. So it does seem strange. And yeah, of course, it's usually been seen as they had this kind of attitude towards fertility, and this was a representation of that. But actually, even with the Paleolithic Venus figurines, no one knows if they really were fertility goddesses or whatever. No one actually knows. It's just something that's become common parlance now. Everybody just refers to it that way, but we don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's definitely something you find, again, lots of different sites, these thicker, women figurines, and they obviously represent something, or they wouldn't have tried to maintain that knowledge for thousands and thousands of years. Or maybe it's just something embedded in our psyche too that keeps popping up. I don't know, but yeah, there's definitely. Well,
some of them, they have like the like them feeding, I think, a baby, or it looks like they're giving birth to a baby. So all right, fair enough, I'll say those ones are to do with fertility, but in general, it just, I don't see that it has to be that.
Sure.
So
well, this has been super fascinating. And I think that when you look at everything that's gone on in terms of history and what we know, and I just I don't know. It's just bizarre to look at some place like Malta and see similarities and then also differences, but all, there's still some of the same hallmarks. So yeah, I don't know. It's just it's bizarre.
It is exciting. I really enjoy researching it, and I think so many people have done a lot of work on this. So casual researchers, independent researchers and writers, loads of obviously academics and experts. And there's still loads of questions to be answered. So there's a lot of scope here. And I think it's great what you guys are doing. Really interesting people that you've had on. And it keeps, every time you meet different people, you just opens your mind up even a little bit more to the possibilities of what was really going on in the past. And I'm really intrigued by it all. And I think it's good to keep having these conversations. And I've got loads more things we could talk about. Like I even made a list. Yeah.
Well, like I said, let's get you back on. And
in an hour and a half, and we barely scratched the surface, and that's just Malta.
Right.
So amazing stuff that we can talk about from
the
Neolithic period.
Let's call this part 1, and we'll schedule some time in the future to get you back on, and we'll do the same thing, but with just different topics. But again, I can't stress this enough. I think I have a pretty good eye for people who know their stuff and research and knowledge. And like I said, I've been following you since the beginning, and you've been putting incredible stuff out there. And initially, I think I reached out to you even a long time ago to come on, but you're like, I just got started, give me some time to get some stuff out there. And that's what you've done now. And if you listen to our podcast, I didn't
even have any branding at that point. I was like, wait.
I like your logo too. And your name is phenomenal. So I think you're going to do very well. And so if anybody listens to our podcast or watches our podcast and you're into ancient civilizations and knowledge and stuff like that, please go subscribe to the Megalith Hunter, YouTube channel, and also go subscribe or follow her on Instagram as well. So if you like looking at these pictures. I subscribed
on both.
Yeah, so go check it out. I have the links down below.
Pop up in there.
I have the links down below. Please go do it. And
awesome.
This has been super, super fun. And I can't wait to see how this unfolds in the future and see how you progress. I mean, that's definitely, like I said, it's definitely one of the more interesting sites. And obviously, like you said, when things kind of get back going and everything, maybe you can get to some other nearby sites and start to do that as well. But
I'm going to solve all the mysteries, guys. All of them.
That's what we're looking for.
Watch me.
Thank you so much for your time, though. And I know.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know. Like I said, we'll get you back on again for sure. But thank you so much. And everybody go check out her stuff one more time. And before we get out of here real quick, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/mindescapepodcast. For just $2 a month, you'll get exclusive guest episodes and segments. We're not going to do one today. However, next time we get Laura on, I'll make sure we have enough time to make one of those happen for everybody. And one more thing, head on over to Indra's Web at indrasweb.org. This is a social media platform we created to connect open minds. So whether you like all the stuff we were just talking about, ancient civilizations and mysteries and stuff like that, or you want to talk about philosophy or metaphysics or psychedelics, whatever it is, head on over there, set up a profile. We're trying to get it in the App Store, so go check that out. But again, thank you so much, Laura, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Everybody stay safe out there. We love you. Peace.